The Avengers, Marvel's most prolific group of heroes made up of Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, Thor, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, transcended their comic book fandom and emerged as a pop culture icon around the world. Both individually and as a team, the Avengers have become household names with incredible brand recognition. But this wasn't always the case. It might be hard to remember, but just over a decade ago, these characters would be referred to as C-list characters, and certainly not the most popular superheroes, not even amongst comic book fans. So how did they go from unwanted, unrecognizable characters to the #1 hero team in comics? Let's find out. Earth's mightiest heroes would first hit the stands in September 1963 in Avengers #1, written by Stan Lee with artist Jack Kirby. Inspired by the success of DC's Justice League, featuring characters such as Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, Marvel wanted to emulate their success by taking some of their biggest names and uniting them in a single book. Over the years, the team would feature various casts of characters, with core members being Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and Thor, though every member would seemingly depart at some point in the comics' history and be replaced by other heroes in the Marvel universe. Characterized by their questioning of heroism, the Avengers would feature storylines that often incorporated popular villains and even had them joining the team in a shift from their evil ways. On the back of incredible art from the legend Jack Kirby, The Avengers was a critical success. The writing and artistry of the series would change over time, with new names taking over, and as a result, different directions in storytelling. The series would develop into character-oriented stories and action-filled melodramas that culminate in popular sagas like the Kree-Skrull War that put the Avengers in the middle of an intergalactic war between two alien races. Consisting of popular comic book characters in their own right, the fusion of Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and Thor was a commercial success and amongst Marvel's most popular comics. Through the expansion of the team and the New York-based team growing rather large, the team would split and the West Coast Avengers would form. Over time, the sales would fluctuate, but was still modestly successful, and through several revamps, the team would maintain relevance among comic book fans over several decades. However, despite the popularity of these characters amongst comic book fans, they'd have a hard time breaking into the mainstream. It's hard to remember a time when the Avengers and the individual characters themselves were not massively popular, but for much of their run in the comics, they were B to C-list characters, with only Hulk cracking the A tier and being widely recognizable even amongst the general population. Ask a person who wasn't into comics or grew up with the popular 90s cartoons and video games who Iron Man was, and maybe they could tell you he existed. Even Captain America, a cultural icon and symbol of America itself, was irrelevant to non-enthusiasts. The average Joe just didn't know anything about these characters beyond possibly recognizing their name. And this would show during Marvel's experience with bankruptcy. The popular comic book publisher found itself in financial trouble after the burst of the collector's bubble, in which people were buying comics as collector's items, hoping they'd reap massive rewards. But when many found themselves with nobody to sell to because everyone already had the comics, people stopped buying. Marvel produced a lot of comics, and with the lack of sales, found themselves in debt and their stock price plummeting. In order to mitigate falling under, Marvel filed for bankruptcy in 1996 and began selling off the film rights of its characters to whatever studio would pay for them. At this time, Marvel had no experience in making films, but did see the value in their intellectual property, and placed stipulations on the purchasing studio in which they must make a movie for the acquired characters every few years, or the rights would revert back to Marvel. Iconic characters with massive appeal such as Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Hulk, along with their supporting casts, were easily sold to Sony, Universal, and Fox. But other characters like Iron Man and Captain America were so unpopular that nobody would buy. Additionally, the financial woes of the comic publisher paved the way for the co-owner of a Marvel toy manufacturer, Ike Perlmutter, to become CEO of Marvel Comics in 2005. Now, Perlmutter is a bit of a controversial figure for many reasons, but one of his ideals as Marvel CEO was establishing a synergy between a film's release and the subsequent release of merchandise. As a result, when discussions about creating a series of films was brought up, the initial choice was Captain America, Marvel's true first Avenger, but as film historian Ben Fritz explains in his book, To decide which film to make first, Marvel conveyed focus groups, but they weren't conveyed in order to ask a random cross-section of people which storylines and characters they would like to see most on screen. Instead, Marvel brought together groups of children and showed them pictures of superheroes and described their abilities and weapons. They then asked the kids which ones they would most like to play with as a toy. The overwhelming answer, to the surprise of many at Marvel, was Iron Man. As a result, Iron Man became the choice to headline Marvel Studios' first foray into film. With Iron Man set to be Marvel Studios' first film, Jon Favreau was hired in April 2006, and he selected Robert Downey Jr. to lead the film as the protagonist, a decision Marvel opposed. However, Favreau maintained his position and stuck with Robert, citing the actor's past as making him appropriate for the choice. He explains, "The best and worst moments of Robert's life have been in the public eye. He had to find an inner balance to overcome obstacles that went far beyond his career. That's Tony Stark. By studying the Iron Man role and developing that script, I realized that the character seemed to line up with Robert in all the good and bad ways. And then something magical happened. Robert nailed his portrayal of Tony Stark in Iron Man and brought him straight off the panels of the comics. Iron Man would become a commercial success and critical hit in 2008, grossing $585 million and smashing expectations. And with this final scene and iconic theme song,
all the mistakes I made, largely public. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Truth is, I am Iron Man.
the film cemented Iron Man as both an A-list superhero and icon. But then, the film did something huge. Following the end credits, this final scene appeared.
I am Iron Man. You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
Who the hell are you?
Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
And with that, comic book fans went crazy, and even non-comic book fans were excited with the revelation that the subsequent films would be leading towards a film adaptation of the Avengers. While DC was having its incredible success with Batman Begins, and The Dark Knight, which would release in 2008 as well, this was Marvel's big breakthrough, and man would they capitalize on it. The subsequent release of the Incredible Hulk movie, Iron Man 2 which featured Natasha Romanoff, Thor, and Captain America the First Avenger, Marvel made commercial hit after hit and established its first phase, which would culminate in the Avengers. It's safe to say the lead up to the Avengers had comic book fans and newcomers alike incredibly excited for the film's release. Chris Hemsworth's Thor and Chris Evans' Captain America were also stellar castings that garnered massive appeal and turned their respective superheroes into mainstream characters as well. Those films turned audiences who'd otherwise want nothing to do with superhero films into passionate fans. And then on May 4th, 2012, history was made. The release of the Avengers broke opening weekend records in North America box offices, earning $207 million in just the weekend and eventually grossing $1.5 billion. Written and directed by Joss Whedon, the team-up of RDJ's Iron Man, Chris Evans' Captain America, Chris Hemsworth's Thor, Mark Ruffalo's Hulk, Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow, and Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye, the hero's humanity and conflicting dynamics were put on display and ultimately resulted in the emergence of Earth's mightiest heroes coming together to stop the alien threat. Now, we could have an entire discussion on what the Avengers did for the MCU and cinema at large, but that's a topic for another video. With the film's massive success, the Avengers undoubtedly became mainstream and certainly A-list characters. And what follow is 19 more films, expanding the MCU to become the largest film universe by far and growing the characters' popularity exponentially. And that just about wraps up this video. It's cool to look back at the emergence of these once irrelevant characters who are now just everywhere. I'm a huge MCU fan and just a comic book fan in general, so learning more about the history of these characters and their growth in fame is always enjoyable. If you liked this video, please consider hitting that thumbs up and subscribing, as it helps out tremendously. I also have some videos planned covering the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and the X-Men franchise, as they were huge for comics and superhero films. If you'd be interested in those and more retrospectives, let me know in the comments down below. I'm Khalid, and I'll see you guys in the next one.